By the second decade of the 20th century, fewer than 40 years after William Wundt formally launched psychology, we have seen that the science had undergone drastic revision. No longer did psychologists agree on the value of introspection, the existence of mental elements, or the need for psychology to remain a pure science. The functional psychologists were rewriting the rules, using psychology in ways that were unacceptable in prior times. The movement towards functionalism had been less revolutionary than evolutionary. The functionalists had not set out deliberately to destroy the establishment of Wundt and Titchener. Instead, they modified it, adding a bit here and changing something there, so that over the years a new form of psychology emerged. It was more a chipping away from the inside than an attack from the outside. The leaders of the functionalist movement were not eager to formalize their position. They saw their task not as breaking with the past, but building on it. Thus, the situation in American psychology in the second decade of the 20th century was that functionalism was maturing, while structuralism maintained a strong but no longer exclusive position. The year 1913 brought a declaration of war, a deliberate break with both of these positions. A protest movement began that was intended to destroy the older points of view. Its leader wanted no modification of the past and no compromise with it. This revolutionary new movement was called behaviorism, and it was promoted by the 35-year-old American psychologist John B. Watson. Watson was particularly vehement and rejected the concept of consciousness. He believed that consciousness had absolutely no value in behavioral psychology. Further, he said that consciousness had never been seen, touched, smelled, tasted, or moved. It is a plain assumption just as unprovable as the old concept of the soul. Therefore, introspection, which assumed the existence of conscious processes, was irrelevant and of no use to a behavioral science. These basic ideas of the behaviorist movement did not originate with Watson, but had been developed for some time in psychology. Like all founders, Watson organized and promoted ideas and issues that were already acceptable and in use. Consider the major forces Watson effectively brought together to form this system of behavioral psychology. Watson offered a clear statement of a direct relationship between his new behaviorism and animal psychology when he wrote, "Behaviorism is a direct outgrowth of studies in animal behavior during the first decade of the 20th century. Thus, we can say that the most important antecedent of Watson's program was animal psychology, which grew out of evolutionary theory and led to attempts to demonstrate the existence of mind in lower organisms and the continuity between animal and human minds." In 1911, the Journal of Animal Behavior, later the Journal of Comparative Psychology, began publication. In 1906, a lecture by Ivan Pavlov was reprinted in the journal, introducing his work on animal psychology to the American audience. Pavlov's research supported a totally objective psychology and Watson's behaviorism in particular. Thus, animal psychology became established and grew increasingly objective. One of the most important researchers in the development of animal psychology, Thorndike fashioned an objective learning theory that focused on overt behavior. Thorndike believed that psychology must study behavior, not mental elements or conscious experiences, and thus he reinforced the trend towards greater objectivity. He did not interpret learning subjectively, but rather in terms of concrete connections between stimuli and responses. Thorndike formally presented his ideas about the stamping in or stamping out of a response tendency as the law of effect. The law of effect is the acts that produce satisfaction in a given situation become associated with that situation. When the situation reoccurs, the act is likely to occur. Ivan Pavlov's famous research helped to complete the shift in the study of learning from its earlier emphasis on subjective ideas to objective and quantifiable physiological events such as glandular secretions and muscular movements. As a result, Pavlov's work provided Watson with a method for studying behavior and for attempting to control and modify it. In the decade before Watson formally founded behaviorism, the intellectual climate in the United States favored the idea of an objective psychology. Indeed, the overall movement of American psychology was in a behavioristic direction. Thus, the notion that psychology should be a science of behavior was already rapidly gaining popularity. Watson's greatness was not in being the first to propose the idea, but in seeing, perhaps more clearly than anyone else, what the times were calling for. He responded boldly and articulately as the agent of a revolution whose success was assured because it was already underway.